Section 7 of Aunt Judy's Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ruhi Haq. Aunt Judy's Tales by Margaret Gatty. Section 7. Nothing to Do, Part 1. Had I a little son, I would christen him Nothing to Do. Charles Lamb. There is a complaint which is not to be found in the doctor's books, but which is nevertheless such a common and troublesome one, that one heartily wishes some physique could be discovered which would cure it. It may be called the nothing to do complaint. Even quite little children are subject to it, but they never have it badly. Parents and nurses have only to give them something to do, or tell them of something to do, and the thing is put right. A puzzle or a picture book relieves the attack at once. But after the children have overgrown puzzles and picture books and nurses, and when even a parent's advice is received with a little impatience, then the nothing to do complaint, if it seizes them at all, is a serious disease, and often very difficult to cure. And, if not cured, alas! Then follows the melancholy spectacle of grown-up men and women who are a plague to their friends and a weariness to themselves, because, living under the notion that there is nothing for them to do, they want everybody else to do something to amuse them. Anyone can laugh at the old story of the gentleman who got into such a fanciful state of mind, hypochondriacal it is called, that he thought he was his own umbrella, and so, on coming in from a walk, would go and lay it in the easy chair by the fire, while he himself went and leant up against the wall in a corner of the hall. But this gentleman was not a bit more fanciful and absurd than the people, whether young or old, who look out of windows on rainy days and groan because there is nothing to do. There is so much for everybody to do that most people leave half their share undone. The oddest part of the complaint is that it generally comes on worst in those who, from being comfortably off in the world, and from having had a great deal of education, have such a variety of things to do, that one would fancy they could never be at a loss for a choice. But these are the very people who are most afflicted. It is always the young people who have books, and leisure, and music, and drawing, and gardens, and pleasure grounds, and villagers to be kind to, who lounge to the rain-bespattered windows on a dull morning, and groan because there is nothing to do. In justice to girls in general, it should be here mentioned that they are on the whole less liable to the complaint than the young lords of the creation, who are supposed to be their superiors in sense. Philosophers may excuse this as they please, but the fact remains that there are few large families in England whose sisterhoods have not at times been teased half out of their wits by the growlings of its young gentlemen during the paroxysms of the nothing-to-do complaint, growling being one of its most characteristic symptoms. Perhaps among all the suffering sisterhoods it would have been difficult to find a young lady less liable to catch such a disorder herself than Aunt Judy, and perhaps that was the reason why she used to do such tremendous battle with number 3, whenever, after his return from school for the holidays, he happened to have an attack. "What are you groaning at through the window, number 3?" she inquired on one such occasion. "Is it raining?" A very gruff-sounding no was the answer, number 3 not condescending to turn round as he spoke. He proceeded, however, to state that it had rained when he got up, and he supposed it would rain again, as a matter of course, for his especial annoyance being implied, and he concluded, "It's so horribly slow here, with nothing to do." Number 6, who was sitting opposite Aunt Judy doing a French exercise, here looked up at her sister, and perceiving a smile steal over her face, took upon herself to think her brother's remark very ridiculous. "So," said she, with a saucy giggle, "I can find you plenty to do, number 3, in a minute. Come and write my French exercise for me." Number 3 turned sharply round at this, with a frown on his face, which by no means added to its beauty, and called out, Now, Miss Pert, I recommend you to hold your tongue. I don't want any advice from a conceited little minx like you." Miss Pert was extinguished at once, and set to work at the French exercise again almost industriously, and a general silence ensued. But people in the nothing-to-do complaint are never quiet for long. Teasing is quite as constant a symptom of it as growling. So number 3 soon came lounging from the window to the table and began. "I say, Judy, I wish you would put those tiresome books and drawings and rubbish away, and I think of something to do." "But it's the books and the drawings and the rubbish that give me something to do," cried Aunt Judy. "You surely don't expect me to give them up, and go arm in arm with you round the house, bemoaning the slowness of our fate which gives us nothing to do, shall we? Come, I don't care. I will if you like. But which shall we complain to first, mamma or the maids? Come, which? Mamma or the maids?" While Miss Pert opposite was labouring with all her might to smother the laugh she dared not indulge in. But number 3 pushed Aunt Judy testily away. "Nonsense, Judy! What has that to do with it? It's all very well for you girls. Now, Miss Pert, mind your own affairs, and don't stare at me, to amuse yourself with all manner of—" "Follies, of course," cried Aunt Judy, laughing. "Don't be afraid of speaking out, number 3. It's all very well for us girls to amuse ourselves with all manner of follies and nonsense and rubbish. Here." Aunt Judy chucked the drawing-book to the end of the table, tossed a dictionary after it, and threw another book or two in the air, catching them as they came down. "While you superior sensible young man that you are, born to be the comfort of your family—" "Be quiet," interrupted number 3, trying to stop her, but she ran round the table and proceeded. "And the enlightener of mankind can't, no, number 3, I won't be stopped, can't amuse yourself with anything, because everything is so horribly slow, there's nothing to do, so you want to tie yourself to your foolish sister's apron string." "It's too bad," shouted number 3, and a race round the table began between them. But Aunt Judy dodged far too cleverly to be caught, so it ended in their resting at opposite ends, number 6 and her French exercises lying between them. "Number 6, my dear," cried Aunt Judy, in the lull of exertion, "I proclaim a holiday from folly and rubbish. Put your books away, and put your impertinence away too. Hold your tongue, and don't be Miss Pest, and vanish as soon as you can." Miss Pert performed 2 or 3 putting away evolutions with the velocity of a sunbeam, and darted off through the door. "Now then, we'll be reasonable," observed Aunt Judy, and carrying a chair to the front of the fire, she sat down, and motioned to number 3 to do the same, taking out from a pocket a little bit of embroidery work, which she kept ready for chatting hours. Number 3 was always willing to listen to Aunt Judy. He desired nothing better than to get her undivided attention, and pour out his groans in her ear. So he sat down with a very good grace, and proceeded to insist that there never was anything so slow as it was. Aunt Judy wanted to know what it was, the place or the people, including herself, or what? Number 3 could explain it no other way than by declaring that everything was slow, and there was nothing to do. Aunt Judy maintained that there was plenty to do, whereupon number 3 said, "But nothing worth doing." Whereupon Aunt Judy told number 3 that he was just like Dr. Faustus, on which of course number 3 wanted to know what Dr. Faustus was like, and Aunt Judy answered that he was just like him, only a great deal older and very learned. "Only quite different then," suggested number 3. "No," said Aunt Judy, "not quite different, for he came one day to the same conclusion that you have done, namely, that there was nothing to do worth doing in the world." "I don't say the world, I'd only say here," observed number 3. "There's plenty to do elsewhere, I dare say." "So you think, because you have not tried elsewhere," answered Aunt Judy. But Dr. Faustus, who had tried elsewhere, thought everywhere alike, and declared there was nothing worth doing anywhere, although he had studied law, physics, divinity, and philosophy all through, and knew pretty nearly everything. Then you see, he did not get much good out of learning, remarked number 3. I do see, was the reply. And what became of him? At that point, replied Aunt Judy, and a very remarkable point too. As soon as he got into the state of fancying there was nothing to do worth doing in God's world, the evil spirit came to him and found him something to do in what I am sure, call the devil's world. I mean wickedness. Oh, that's a story written upon what sold him, exclaimed number 3 contemptuously. For Satan finds some mischief still for idle hands to do. Judy, I call that a regular sell. Not a bit of it, cried Aunt Judy warmly. I don't suppose the man who wrote the story ever saw Watts' hymns, or intended to teach anything half as good. It's Mamma's moral. She told me that she screwed it out of the story, though she doubted whether it was meant to be there. And what's the rest of the story, then? Inquired number 3, whose curiosity was aroused. Well, when the old doctor found the world as it was, so slow as you very unmeaningly call it, he took to conjuring and talking with evil spirits by way of amusement, and then they easily persuaded him to be wicked, merely because it gave him something fresh and exciting to do. What's him again? I told you so, exclaimed number 3, but the story's all nonsense from beginning to end. Nobody can conjure or talk to evil spirits in reality, so the whole thing is impossible, and where you find the moral, I don't know. Number 3 leant back and yawned as he concluded. He was rather disappointed that nothing more entertaining had come out of the story of Dr. Faustus, but Aunt Judy had by no means done. Impossible about conjuring and actually talking to evil spirits, certainly, said she. But spiritual influences, both bad and good, come to us all. No. Number 3, without bodily communion. So for those who are inclined to feel like Dr. Faustus, there is both a moral and a warning in his fate. I don't know about what, cried number 3. I think he was uncommonly stupid. After all he had learnt, to get into such a mess. Why, you yourself are always trying to make out the more people labor and learn, the more sure they are to keep out of mischief. Now then, how do you account for the story of your friend, Dr. Faustus? Because, like King Solomon, he did not labor and learn in a right spirit or to the right end, replied Aunt Judy. Lord Bacon remarks that when, after the creation, God looked upon everything he had made, behold, it was very good, whereas when man turned him about and took a view of the world and his own labors in it, he found that all was vanity and vexation of spirit. Why did he come to such a different conclusion, do you think? I suppose because the world had got bad before King Solomon's time, suggested number 3. Its inhabitants had, replied Aunt Judy. They had become subject to sin and misery, but the world was still God's creation, and proofs of the very good for which he had pronounced over it were to be found in every direction, and even in fallen man, if Solomon had the sense, or rather I should say good feeling, to look for them. Ah, number 3, there was plenty to be learnt and done that would not have ended in vanity and vexation of spirit, if Solomon had learnt, in order to trace out the glory of God, instead of establishing his own, and if he had worked to create, so far as was in his power, a world of happiness for other people, instead of seeking nothing but his own amusement. If he had worked in the Spirit of God, in short. But who can? Nobody, exclaimed number 3. Yes, everybody who tries can, to a certain extent, said Aunt Judy. It only wants the right feeling, some of the godlike feeling which originated the creation of a beautiful world, and caused the contemplation of it to produce the sublime complacency which is described. And God looked upon everything he had made, and behold, it was very good. It's a sermon, Judy, cried number 3, half bored, yet half amused at the notion of her preaching. I'll set up a pulpit for you at once, shall I? No, no, be quiet, number 3, exclaimed Aunt Judy. I wish you would try and understand what I say. Well, then, said number three, it appears to me that do what one might now, the world has grown bad. It would be impossible to pronounce that very good as a result of one's work. There would always be something miserable and unsatisfactory at the end of everything. I mean, even if one really was to look into things closely and work for other people's good, as you say. There might be something miserable and unsatisfactory in the result, certainly, answered Aunt Judy, but that it would all be vanity and vexation of spirit, I deny. Our blessed Saviour came into the world after it had grown bad, remember? And he worked solely for the restoration of the very good, which sin had defaced. It was undoubtedly miserable and unsatisfactory that he should be rejected by the very creatures he came to help. But when he uttered the words, "It is finished," the work which he had accomplished, he might well have looked upon and called very good, very, very good, even beyond the creation. Were that possible? There can be no comparison between our Saviour and us, murmured number three. No, replied his sister, but only let people work in the same direction, and they will have more profit of their labour than King Solomon ever owned to, who had, one fears, only learnt in order to be learned, and worked to please himself. No man who employs himself in tracing out God's footsteps in the world, or in working in God's spirit for the world, will ever find such labours end in vanity and vexation of spirit. Solomon, Dr. Faustus, and the grumblers have only themselves to thank for their disappointment. It's very curious, observed number three, getting up and stretching himself over the fire. I mean about Solomon and Dr. Faustus. But what can one do? What can you or I do? It's absurd to be fancying one can do good to one's fellow creatures. None the less, there is one I want you to do good to at the present moment, said Aunt Judy. If it's not actually raining, don't you remember what despair number one was in this morning when father sent her off on the pony in such a hurry? Ah, that pony! That was just what I wanted myself, interrupted number three. Exactly, of course, replied Aunt Judy. But you were not the messenger father wanted, so do not let us go all over that ground again, pray. The fact was, number one had just heard that her pet, Tawny Rachel, was very ill, and she wanted to go and see her and give her some good advice, and I am to go instead. Now, number three, suppose you go instead of me, and save me a wet walk? Number three, of course, began by protesting that it was not possible that he could do any good to an old woman. Old women were not at all in his way. He could only say, "How do you do?" and come away. Aunt Judy disputed this. She thought he could offer her some creature comforts, and ask whether she had seen the doctor, and what he said, as number one particularly wished to know. What an idea! No, no, he must decline inquiring what the doctor said. It would be absurd, but he could offer her something to eat. And just ask if she had had the doctor. Well, just that, and come away. It would not occupy many minutes, but he wished while Aunt Judy was about it, she had found him something rather longer to do. Aunt Judy promised to see what could be devised on his return, and number three departed. And a very happily chosen errand it was, for it happened in this case, as it so constantly does happen, that what was begun for other people's sake ended in personal gratification. Number three went to see Tawny Rachel, out of good-natured compliance with Aunt Judy's request, but found an interest and amusement in the visit itself, which he had not in the least expected. 10, 20, 30 minutes elapsed, and he had not returned, and when he did so at last, he burst into the house, far more like an avalanche than a young gentleman who could find nothing to do. Coming in the back way, he ran into the kitchen, and told the servants to get some hot water ready directly, for he was sure something would be wanted. Then, passing forward, he shouted to know where his mother was, and having found her, entreated she would order some comfortable gruely stuff or other to be made for the sick old woman, particularly insisting that it should have ale or wine, as well as spice and sugar in it. He was positive that it was just what she ought to have. She had said how cold she was, and how glad she should be of something to warm her inside, and there was nobody to do anything for her at home. What a shame it was for a poor old creature like that to be left with only two dirty boys to look after her, and they always at play in the street. Her daughter and husband were working out, and she sat moaning over the fire from pain without anyone to care. Tender-hearted and impulsive, if thoughtless, the spirit of number three had been moved within him, at the spectacle of the gaunt old woman in this hour of her lonely suffering. Poor Tawny Rachel, the children had called her so, from the heroine of Mrs. Hannah More's tale, because of those dark gypsy eyes of hers, which had formerly given such a fine expression to a handsome but melancholy face. Melancholy because careworn from the long life struggle for daily bread for a large indulged family, who scarcely knew, at the day of her death, that she had worn herself out for their sakes. Poor Tawny Rachel, she was one day asked by a well-meaning shopkeeper, of whom she had purchased a few goods, where she thought she was going to. Tawny Rachel turned her sad eyes upon her interrogator, and made answer, "Going to? Why, where do you think I'm going to, but to heaven? 'Deed, where do you think I'm going to, but to heaven?" she repeated to herself slowly, as if to recover breath, and then added, "I should like to know who heaven is for, if not for such as me, that have slaved all their lives through for other folk." And so saying, Tawny Rachel turned round again and went away. Poor Tawny Rachel! The theology was imperfect enough, but so had been her education and advantages, yet as surely as her scrupulous, never-failing honesty and unmurmuring self-denial must have been inspired by something beyond human teaching. So surely did it prove no difficult to lead her onwards to those simple verities of the Christian faith, which in her case seemed to solve the riddle of a weary, unsatisfactory life, and confiding in which the approach of death became to her the advent of the Prince of Peace. But she had quite cheered up, remarked number three, at the notion of something comforting and good, and so he had come off at once. At once the exclamation came from Aunt Judy, who had entered the room, and was listening to the account. "Why, number three, you must have been there an hour at least, and nevertheless I dare say you have forgotten about the doctor." "The doctor?" cried number three, laughing. "It's the doctor who has kept me all this time. You never heard such fun in your life, only he's an awful old rascal, I must say." Mamma and Aunt Judy gazed at number three in bewilderment. The respectable old village practitioner, who had superintended all the diseases in the place for nearly half a century, to be called an awful old rascal at last! What could number three be thinking of? Certainly not of the respectable village practitioner, as he soon explained by describing the arrival at Tawny Rachel's cottage of a travelling quack with a long white beard. "My dear number three!" exclaimed mamma. "Mother dear, I can't help it!" cried number three, and proceeded to relate that while he was sitting with the old woman, listening to the account of her aches and pains, some one looked in at the door and asked if she wanted anything, but before she could speak, remarked how ill she seemed, and said he could give her something to do her good. "Judy," added number three, suddenly breaking off, "he looked just like Dr. Faustus, I'm sure." "Never mind about that," cried Aunt Judy. "Tell us what Tawny Rachel said." "Oh, she called out that he must give it, if she was to have it, for she had nothing to pay for it with. I had a shilling in my pocket, and was just going to offer it, when I recollected he would most likely do her more harm than good. But the gentleman with the white beard walked in immediately, set his pack down the table, and said, 'Then, my good woman, I shall give it you.' And out he brought a bottle, and tasted it before he gave it to her, and promised her that it would cure her if she took it all." "My dear number three," repeated mamma once more. "Yes, I know she can't be cured, mother, and I think she knows it too, but still she took it very kind, as she called it, of him, and asked him if he would like to rest him a bit by the fire, and the gentleman accepted the invitation, and there we all three sat, for really I quite enjoyed seeing him, and he began to warm his hands, remarking that the young gentleman, that was I, looked very well. Oh, Judy, I very nearly said, "Thank you, Dr. Faustus," but I only laughed and nodded, and really did hold my tongue. And then the two began to talk, and it was as good as any story you ever invented, Aunt Judy. Tawny Rachel was very inquisitive, and asked him, "You've come a long way, sir, I suppose?" "Yes, ma'am, I'm a great traveller, and have been so a many years." "It's a wonder you have not settled before now." "I might have settled, ma'am, a many times." "Ah, when folks once began wandering, they can't settle down. You were, maybe, brought up to it." "I was brought up to something a great deal better than that, ma'am." "You was, sir? It's a pity, I'm sure." "My father was physician to Queen Elizabeth, ma'am, a many years." When Number 3 arrived at this point of the dialogue, Mamma and Aunt Judy both exclaimed at once, and the former repeated once more the expostulatory, "My dear Number 3," which delighted Number 3, who proceeded to assure him that he had himself interrupted the travelling quack here by suggesting that it was Queen Charlotte he meant. "Old Queen Charlotte, Judy, that Number 1 was telling the children about the other day." But the gentleman, as Number 3 called him, had turned very red at the doubt thus thrown on his accuracy, and put a rather threatening croak into his voice, and said, "Asking your pardon, young gentleman, I know what I'm saying, and it was Queen Elizabeth, and not Charlotte, nor anybody else." Number 3 described that he had felt it best after this to hold his tongue and say no more. So Tawny Rachel put in her word and remarked, it was a wonder the Queen hadn't made their fortunes, on which the gentleman turned rather red again, and said that the Queen did make their fortune, but wouldn't let them keep it, for fear they should be too great and too rich, that was it. This statement required a little explanation, but the gentleman was ready with all particulars. The Queen used to pay his father by hundreds of pounds at a time, because that was due to him; but being jealous of his having so much money, she always set some one to take it away from him as he left the place. So that was the reason why there was no fortune put by for him after his father died, and that was the reason why he couldn't very well settle at first, though everybody wished him to stay, and so he took to travelling, for his father had left him all his secrets, and he was qualified to practise anywhere, and had cured some thousands of sick folks up and down. Number 3 declared that he had not made the old man's account of himself a bit more unconnected than it really was, and on the whole it sounded very imposing to poor Tawny Rachel, who watched his departure with a sort of respectful awe. Number 3 added that, not liking to curb her faith either in the man or the bottle, he had himself helped her to the first dose, and had then begun to talk about the creature comforts before described, the very mention of which seemed to cheer the old lady's heart, and to interest her at least as much as the biography of the travelling quack. "So now, mother," concluded he, "order the gruel, and we'll give 3 cheers for Queen Elizabeth and Dr. Faustus, Judy? But I do think the poor old thing ought not to take that man's poisonous rubbish, so here's my shilling, and welcome, if you'll give some more, and let us send for a real doctor." The nothing-to-do morning had nearly slipped away between the conversation with Aunt Judy and the visit to Tawny Rachel, and when soon after a friend called to take Number 3 on a fossil hunt, and he had to snatch a hasty morsel before his departure, he declared he was like the poor governess in the song, who was sure to "find out with attention and zeal that she'd scarcely have time to partake of a meal." There was so much to do. "But you're a capital fellow, Judy," he added, kissing her, "and you'll tell me a story when I come back." And off he ran, shutting his ears to Aunt Judy's declaration that she only told stories to the little ones. Nor would she, on his return, and during the cosy evening nothing-to-do hour, consent to devote herself on this especial amusement only. So after arguing the point for a time, he very wisely yielded, and declared at last that he would be a little one too, and listen to a little one's story if Aunt Judy would tell one. End of Nothing to Do, Part 1.